If we were to plan a meal together, how might we go about it? Well, you might think, the universe is made up of elements, so we could look at a periodic table and see what we could make from that. And to be fair, in the right proportions, these make a potato. But you know this is a silly way to go about it. Rather, you'd start with human goals. I'm hungry, I want to eat, potatoes are edible and available, I like potatoes, so great, let's go make an aloo gobi. The atomic components that wind up being a part of the effort are kind of an after effect. But when it comes to designing for an assistant, people often start with the technology. How does natural language processing work? What's a regression analysis? How do classifiers work? And while knowing these things can help, it's a little like starting dinner with the periodic table. Don't design from atomic elements of the technology. You are a user-centered designer. Start with user needs. And while the particular needs that inform a given design depend largely on the domain, designing an assistant for customers of a bank, for instance, is different than an assistant for an airplane mechanic, there is a model that you can apply to most any domain to get a working set of first ideas. This presentation is to introduce you to that model, which I call the 5 universal assists. We'll take a tour through the model, and along the way, I'm going to share as many illustrative examples as I can squeeze in. And one last note before we begin. Most of the time when people hear assistant, they automatically think of a chatbot. You will see that none of my examples are chatbots, and that's part of my goal here, to get you to think more fundamentally about what it means to assist users. I first presented the model you see in Designing Agentive Technology, which you may recall from the 2018 UX India, but that was for AI that does its thing away from the user's attention. This time we're discussing assistants, so I'll focus on AI that helps users with whatever a task that their attention is on. There is another model for AI that helps with creative endeavors, but I'll have to save that for next time. The bow tie diagram describes the basic steps of the human side of interaction: see, think, and do. For example, if I was walking into a room, I might see that it was dark, think, well, there must be a lamp around here somewhere, find and flip the switch. See, think, and do. The computer will have its own see, think, do loop, but because computers, it's called input, processing, and output, and is the domain of engineers, not UX. The see, think, do loop describes interactions at many scales, from micro interactions to scenarios and epics, to touch points and a long-term service. So they're a good foundation for us to build on. Let's look at these assists. The first thing you can do is to help users know what's happening in the world or in the system. You can increase signal to noise by highlighting the stuff that the system thinks is interesting or suspicious. And pro tip, don't prevent users from exploring the other stuff. One example is Volvo's large animal detection, which helps snap drivers' attentions to dangerous, unexpected animals in the road. You can also extend their senses, helping them visualize or audialize things that are normally imperceptible. If you've never seen the Red Stripe app, this overlays patterns onto blocks of colors in the camera feed, and this allows colorblind people to see them. You can also sensitize users to a potential event, show them what to look for, and let them practice to increase their perceptiveness without the assist. Note that these all work whether you're building on AI or not, even though AI gives us some new tools to make them even more powerful. Micro primer here is due here. In AI, much of the assistant functions builds on a feature called anomaly detection that compares one set of data to another and looks for where things look off between them. And this might seem trivial for simple comparisons, but when you're looking at a very complex, multivariate system like, say, the supply chain, basic human perception can get some help. And full disclosure, I work on supply chain AI at IBM, so I have a bias towards examples like those. All right, helping them think. This universal assist may seem a little surprising. Like, how can you help someone think? It makes a little more sense when you break it down into helping users understand the meaning of what they're perceiving and helping them plan what they're about to do. It's the think side of see and the think side of do. And since these types of thinking are different, I break the think step into two different assists, know and plan. So helping them know. You know, I can look at an x-ray and on the surface of it, I'll see the same thing that a trained radiologist would. But the radiologist has years of training and experience to know what to look for and what to dismiss. Now, assists are not replacement for training and experience, but we can help users be more informed about what they're looking at in a handful of ways. The first is to help them know a little bit about what they're seeing. For instance, Android users can hold their camera up to almost anything, and Google Lens will tell them what that thing is. I was on Facebook a while back, and a friend shared this weird plant, and he was asking folks if they knew what it was. And I used Google Lens, and I identified it as an Osage orange or a horse apple. Pro tip, don't eat it if you find one. Another way we can help them is by helping them to recall. Even well-trained users may not remember information that is associated with infrequent or edge case things. And to help with this, an assistant can summon just-in-time information. One example that I love to share is the assistant that IBM developed for an airline client that lets airline mechanics show a part to the assistant, and the assistant can summon related instructions for removing, repairing, or reinstalling that part. We can also help them grok. Now, grok is a word that comes to us from science fiction to sort of patch a hole in the English language. And it means understand, but it means to understand deeply. And instruction manuals have to presume you have some working knowledge of the domain, but you may not, in fact, have a full working knowledge of the domain. So if you need it, or say, for example, if you need to know about the fundamentals of electricity before checking a fuse, a sophisticated assistant should be able to help you with that, or hook you up to content that can answer those questions. So here we should have a micro primer, because AI accomplishes all these assists via classifiers. And classifiers are algorithms that are trained on a large set of examples, and thereafter can look at some new thing and reply with which example it thinks it most looks like. Help them plan. Once a user understands the state of things, they need to plan their next steps. We can assist them by helping them understand their options, the likely outcomes, and moreover, help them estimate which are likely to succeed. Now, in simple interactions, this may simply be presenting known outcomes. You may be familiar with Photoshop's color sliders. And these could just be a simple slider that you use to set a variable, but Photoshop's color sliders tell you what the effect on the ultimate color will be, and that lets you target an outcome. In more complex systems, this may require developing and comparing different scenarios. And as long as you're doing that, you can make recommendations. The assistant can run those scenarios to determine what the likely outcomes of each of them are. And if those outcomes are quantifiable, then recommend the best course of action. There's a software called SpaceMaker, which will show architects lots of different configurations of buildings on a given site so that they can optimize for different architecture goals, like minimizing street noise, or maximizing sun, or minimizing the windiness in the center of a complex of buildings. Time for another micro primer. The way AI does this is by something called regression analysis. And regression analysis is a set of statistical functions that can predict how one set of variables will tend to influence another variable. Examples include life expectancy, and that's like for a person or a machine component, or maximum price that will ensure a sale inside of a week, or how much product we might expect to sell next quarter. A final bit of planning is to rehearse the action. So if the do that they need to do is physical and complicated, they might want to rehearse, and the assistant can help them. Um, in those scenarios, everything in the help them perform will apply, except the stakes will be a lot lower because they can, if they mess it up, can just go back to rehearse again. Help them perform. For most interfaces, doing may be a discrete action like pressing a key or tapping a pane of glass. But for some, performance of a task can be a complex affair. I mean, even if it's simple, users may welcome the assistance in the form of a challenge to excel. So we can help them perform to tolerances. An interface could nudge a user when they're approaching marginal performance. And if they don't respond, and it's safe, legal, and not annoying, you can correct for them. An example is Volkswagen's Lane Assist. This helps drivers when they're drifting into the neighboring lanes using the markings on the road. Another is performing to the rules or even to the law, right? As long as those things are known and in the system, the assistant can help a user avoid violating rules. And that can be as simple as the rules of spelling or grammar or policy or even the law. One example is Grammarly, which is a browser plugin that will alert users with suggestions to correct spelling or grammar and even writing structure in order to be more clear. We can also help users to perform to best practices, right? And it's like a soft version of rules. They're known patterns for achieving design goals. And when these are detectable, an assistant can help users know them, perform them, and even learn the practice. And if they're quite sophisticated, even help evolve that best practice within their community. It evaluates the live camera image in a user's phone in order to make recommendations about how to get the best shot for technical definitions of best shot. And lastly, an assistant can help to challenge a user, encouraging them to excel by letting them opt into some benchmark. That benchmark could be their own best prior performance, or a community best performance, or a known average, or even a quota that's been set for them. If you've never played racing games, most modern ones will display a ghost car that represents a player's own position on the last lap. That helps them know if they're doing better or worse and encourages them to keep getting better as they continue racing. And as an aside, if you've never seen the touching documentary called Player 2, it's about a boy who's racing his dead father's ghost car in a game. Help them reflect. When I present about designing for AI, one of the more common questions I get during the Q&A is, hey, if we get help, won't we become worse at the thing we were trying to do? Won't we come to rely on the assistant? Won't it de-skill us? Now it can, but if it does have that effect, I lay the blame not on the technology, but the design. A good assistant is like a butler, right? It helps out with the thing you're trying to do. But a great assistant is like a coach or a tutor, helping users get better and smarter about what it is they're doing, even when the assistant goes away. And for that reason, I think that another universal assist that we should pay attention to is not just in the doing, but in the thinking about the doing. These assistants help the user answer metacognitive questions like, well, how did you do? And of course, supporting that with metrics. It can also mean, what will you do differently next time? Which you can support with scenarios and best practices. And of course, the ultimate question, which is, what does it all mean? So that's them. Perceive, know, plan, perform, and reflect. Whatever you're designing, I hope that these can help inspire your thinking about how your product or service can be more than a tool, but be an active assistant or a coach, and that can help make your users even smarter and the world of people a better place.